Hello, my name's Lilian Simmonds. I am a nurse. I work for Hospice at Home, West Cumbria. And for the last 10 months, our organisation has been working with the Wordsworth Trust to introduce our patients, carers, staff and volunteers not only to Wordsworth's poetry, but also to the healing and transformative power of words. I've been asked today to come and talk about my interest in Dorothy Wordsworth. And I suppose, like many people, I came to know Dorothy through her far more famous brother. I was introduced to the Daffodils poem as a child, and then in my 20s I rediscovered Wordsworth poetry when I was going through a difficult time. And all I can say is that his words connected me to the sublime. He writes, "Well, with an eye made quiet by the deep power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things." It's as though through his love of nature and his incredible gift of language, he had found a way into a secret world. He writes, "I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thought, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused." William was the first person I had found who was able to describe those rare moments when we experience connection to the infinite. It was a very different connection to his sister Dorothy. I think I'd always known that William had a sister, but my interest was first piqued when I discovered we shared the same birthday. We were both born on Christmas Day, 190 years apart. I bought a copy of her illustrated Grasmere journals, and I have to confess that when I first read it, I was irritated by what I call her peas, pies and pains accounts. But I'd recently started my own journal, and I was quite horrified when I looked back to read how many entries began, "I don't feel well, I'm having a bad day, I didn't sleep last night." Dorothy's journal connects us to the realities of everyday life. Journal is French for day book. It's how things are at a given moment in time. And while it is wonderful to be connected to the sublime, it is in the mundane realities where our lives are lived. So I began to read everything I could about Dorothy. Through her life and writing, I built a picture and found more connections. And what I'm going to say today, I just want to point out are my own views. I'm not an expert. What I'm saying comes from a layman's point of view, and please forgive me from reading from my notes. It was far easier to compose my thoughts at home with a pen and paper than in front of a camera. And that brings me to another personal connection. Both Dorothy and myself have highly sensitive personalities. Dorothy was well known for her sensibility. It's recorded that she cried when she first saw the sea. She was also bitterly upset by a broken swallow's nest. Those of us with highly sensitive natures often struggle in our early years, particularly if, like Dorothy, we have had a traumatic childhood, and we can get easily overwhelmed when too many demands are placed on us. It is noticeable throughout her journal that Dorothy didn't often write when away from home or when the house was full of visitors. People with high sensitivity are drawn to caring roles. Dorothy Wordsworth cared for people all of her life, as I have done in my work as a nurse. But problems can arise when we get caught up in other people's needs and forget our own. We have a protective barrier around ourselves, and we can be prone to compassion burnout. Caring can be our greatest gift, but also our greatest weakness. The other gift and drawback of a highly sensitive personality is that we are very good at picking up on other people's emotions and feelings. Coleridge compared Dorothy to a perfect electrometer. That was a device used to respond to minute fluctuations in electrical charge. De Quincey wrote of Dorothy, "The pulses of light are not more quick or more inevitable in their flow and adulation than were the answering and echoing movement of her sympathizing attention." We're also very good at being what everyone else wants us to be. It was said of Dorothy that she quickly took on the colouring of her environment and her companions. But the danger is that if you spend all your time being what others want you to be, you don't spend a great deal of time being yourself. It's so important to develop self-awareness. And as well as personal connections with Dorothy, she's also been my teacher. She's shown me the importance of paying attention and of slowing down. I think, like many people, we have this romantic picture of Dorothy and William rambling about Grasmere, writing and reading poetry. Yet their life was very busy, and it was Dorothy's job to keep body and soul together. As well as being William's scribe and muse, she baked bread and pies, planted a garden, made shoes and clothes. She painted and decorated, and yet she still found time to pay attention, to be still. She writes, "I sat a long time looking at the mountains. I sat a long time watching the hurrying waves. I sat till I could hardly drag myself away." How important it is in our crazy and often busy lives to pay attention and to slow down. Dorothy has also taught me the importance of connection to nature. When her brother wrote these words, "This world is too much with us, late and soon. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours," he was certainly not talking about his sister Dorothy. For when William was going through a crisis of identity and questioning his vocation, it was Dorothy who not only helped him to recover his ambition to be a poet, but who rekindled his love for the natural world. He writes, "She maintained for me a saving intercourse with my true self." He said to her, "In thy voice I catch the language of my former heart." Dorothy Wordsworth has been described as one of the most remarkable writers about life in the English countryside. There are endless examples in her journals of her wonderful descriptions of the natural world. Here is just a very small example. "The lake was perfectly still. The sun shone on the hill and vale. The distant birch trees looked like large golden flowers. Nothing else in colour was distinct and separate, but all the beautiful colours seemed to be melted into one another and joined together in one mass, so that there was no difference, though an endless variety when one tried to find it out." Dorothy's words, written over 200 years ago, are so relevant to us today when our beautiful world is so under threat. In Dorothy Wordsworth's writing, I find lessons and warnings for my own life and work. When I read her words, it's as though she's standing over my shoulder, telling me to pay attention to my life. Dorothy teaches me about meaning and purpose. In her journal, she states why she wrote what has become known as the Grasmere Journals. "I resolved to write a journal, and I set about keeping my resolve because I will not quarrel with myself, and because I shall give William pleasure by it." Those of us with highly sensitive personalities know exactly what Dorothy meant by quarrelling with oneself. We live in our minds for most of the time, and it is so important for us to have a creative outlet that distracts us from our endless thinking about our thinking. Like Dorothy, I have discovered that writing takes me out of myself and helps me to process my thoughts in a creative way and to put my life into perspective. But it is Dorothy's second reason for writing the journal that flags a warning: to give William pleasure by it. Dorothy was well aware of the necessary and important part she played in her brother's life and work. We will never know the extent of the collaboration between them, but I suspect it was a great deal more than we know about. But the danger is, if our meaning and purpose are centred around another, then when they no longer need us, we can easily lose our focus. This is what I think happened to Dorothy after William's marriage to Mary. Yes, she was still needed. Yes, she still wrote, but not, I believe, with the same passion and eloquence as she did in her Grasmere journals. Also, in Dorothy's life and writing, I find lessons and warnings about creativity. That Dorothy Wordsworth was a highly creative person with her own unique voice is beyond question. Although very little of her writing was published in her lifetime, those around her were aware of her talents. Coleridge wrote, "Dorothy Wordsworth, the sister of our great poet, is a woman of great genius, and but for the absorption of her whole soul in her brother's fame and writing, would perhaps in a different style have been as great a poet as himself. And what was Dorothy's response? I have not these powers which Coleridge thinks I have. In fact, here is her own view about her writing. I can hardly read it myself. I have no command of language, no power of expressing my ideas, and no one was ever so inept at moulding words into a regular metre. Not only did Dorothy suffer from lack of self-worth, but I feel she was trying too hard to be like her brother, rather than find her own unique voice. I often wonder what Dorothy would have given the world if she had written for herself and not to please her brother. Yet I do understand. Dorothy's personality, her desire to please others, the fact she lived with and was friends with such talented people would have made it very difficult. I often feel like this when I come into the Jerwood room, surrounded by the works of titans of English literature. Yet how important it is for us to recognise that we each have a unique voice and have the courage to find it and give it back to the world. And so I'd like to finish with Dorothy Wordsworth's unique voice. I've had great pleasure over the past year of taking Dorothy's sublime prose and putting it into poetry on different subjects. So here is Mountains by Dorothy Wordsworth. The yellow autumnal hills wrapped in sunshine, overhung with partial mist, the colours of the mountains soft and rich, cattle pasturing upon the hills, kites sailing in the sky above our heads, the mountains forever varying, now hid in the clouds, now with their tops visible. Helm Crag, bold and craggy, a being by itself, as if belonging to a more splendid world. A glorious wild solitude under that lofty purple crag. Mountains like stonework, wrought up with huge hammers, gave back the sound. An alpine fire like red upon the tops, snow-covered mountains spotted with sunlight, the prospect most divinely beautiful. A spectacle of the grandeur of heaven and earth commingled. My heart dissolved in what I saw and thought I could have stayed here forever.